I always believed that love, once solidified in the fires of commitment, was unbreakable. I had built my life around that belief, sacrificed, endured, and given every ounce of my soul to my marriage. Claire had been my world for over 2 decades, my constant, my best friend, my partner in every sense of the word. Together, we had built a home, raised 3 children, and weathered storms that should have torn us apart. But nothing had prepared me for the storm I was about to face. One far more sinister, far more personal. It was a crisp Friday morning when my daughter, Ava, showed up at my doorstep with her little girl, Emily. Something in her eyes felt off, a hesitation in her voice, as if she was carrying a burden too heavy for her young heart to bear. I should have noticed it then, should have caught the tremor in her voice when she greeted me with a forced smile. "Hey, Dad. Thought I'd come by before your trip," she said, setting Emily down, who immediately started toddling around my near-empty living room. I glanced around, the sight of my packed bags near the door a stark reminder that today was supposed to be different. Claire and I were supposed to be leaving for a surprise anniversary cruise. 25 years together. Our silver anniversary, a milestone I had been looking forward to for months. But Claire was nowhere to be found. I exhaled deeply, masking my disappointment with a smile as I poured Ava a cup of coffee. "Glad you came, sweetheart. But something tells me this isn't just a casual visit." Ava's hands trembled as she wrapped them around the warm mug. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you. Something about Mom." And then, in a single breath, my world crumbled. "She left, Dad. She went away for the weekend, with someone else." I stared at her, my mind struggling to grasp the weight of those words. "She what?" Ava bit her lip, guilt flashing in her eyes, as if she had been complicit in this betrayal. "Mom, she's been seeing someone, Dad. And this weekend, she's with him." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I clenched my jaw, a storm of emotions raging inside me. Anger, pain, disbelief. The woman I had loved, the mother of my children, had made a conscious decision to walk away from everything we had built. And she had involved our daughter in the lie. "Who?" I asked, my voice a quiet thunder. She hesitated before whispering the name. "Craig Higgins." The name hit me like a hammer to the chest. Craig Higgins, her so-called old friend. The man who had always lingered a little too close, laughed a little too hard at her jokes. The man I had foolishly trusted. "And you knew?" My gaze bore into her, unrelenting. Ava's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, it wasn't like that. We thought she just needed a break. She told us she felt trapped, that she needed to find herself." "Find herself?" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "And she thought screwing another man would help with that?" Ava flinched at the harshness of my words, but I didn't care. This wasn't just some midlife crisis. This was a betrayal of everything I had ever known, and it wasn't going to go unanswered. I spent the next hour listening to Ava spill the whole disgusting truth. Claire had been planning this for months. It hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment decision. There had been secret messages, hidden credit card bills, late-night calls she had passed off as work. And worst of all, Ava and my other daughter, Katie, had known. "You helped her," I said quietly, staring into my coffee. "You helped her plan this." Ava broke down, sobbing. "Dad, we didn't know what else to do. She said she needed this. She said it wasn't about you, that it was about her." I let out a slow breath, nodding. "I see." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The man I had been, the devoted husband, the loyal provider, died a quiet death. In his place, a new version of me was born. One who would not be played for a fool. One who would make sure that Claire regretted every single choice she had made. By the time Ava left, I had already set my plan in motion. I sat in my empty living room, staring at the suitcases that had been meant for our anniversary trip. A bitter chuckle escaped me. How poetic. Claire had taken our marriage for granted, assumed that she could play this game without consequences. But she had underestimated me. I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of betrayal she had inflicted on me. And when I was done, she would regret ever thinking I was the kind of man who could be broken. I didn't sleep that night. My mind churned through every detail Ava had shared, dissecting every lie, every deception. Claire had been planning this for months, had been so sure of her safety, so comfortable in my loyalty that she had involved our own daughters in her betrayal. That was her first mistake. Her second? Assuming I would simply crumble and disappear. By morning, I was already in my lawyer's office. Divorce? Daniel, my lawyer and longtime friend, raised an eyebrow. Are you sure about this, Nick? I exhaled slowly, clasping my hands together. Not yet, but I want options. I want to make sure that when I strike, she never sees it coming. A slow grin spread across Daniel's face. I was hoping you'd say that. And so it began. Claire had made the first move, but I was going to finish the game. I hired a private investigator to track her weekend activities. If she thought she could have a secret rendezvous with Craig and walk away unscathed, she had another thing coming. I wanted pictures, receipts, timestamps, everything. Proof that would not only destroy her credibility but ensure that when I finally confronted her, she would have no room to lie. But that was only step one. I spent the next 48 hours making arrangements, shifting money, securing assets, and ensuring that when she walked back into my life, she would find it completely unrecognizable. This wasn't just revenge. This was a complete and utter obliteration of the world she had so foolishly taken for granted. Monday arrived, and so did Claire. She walked through the front door like nothing had happened, her face lit with the fake enthusiasm of a woman who believed she had gotten away with murder. "Hey, honey," she greeted, dropping her purse on the counter. "I missed you." I stared at her, my expression unreadable. "Did you?" Something flickered in her eyes, hesitation, uncertainty. "Of course," she laughed lightly, walking toward me. "The trip was refreshing. I feel like a new woman." "I bet you do." I watched her, silent and still, as she leaned in for a kiss. At the last moment, I stepped back. Claire frowned. "Nick?" I gave her a slow smile. "Let's sit down. We need to talk." Her face paled. "Good." She sat across from me at the dining table, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. "Did you enjoy your weekend?" I asked, tilting my head. Claire swallowed. "Nick, I slid a manila folder across the table. "Don't lie to me." She hesitated, her hand hovering over it before finally pulling it open. Inside were the pictures, dozens of them. Claire and Craig at the hotel, laughing over dinner, walking hand in hand along the beach. A particularly damning one of her straddling him in a secluded cabana, her face drained of color. "Nick," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can explain." I leaned forward, my gaze like steel. "No, you can't." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I let it sit, let her drown in it. And then I delivered the final blow. "You're going to pack your bags, Claire," I said calmly, "because this house, it's not yours anymore." She sputtered, her eyes wide with panic. "What? Nick, please let." I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. "I spent 25 years building this life, Claire. While you were out there finding yourself in another man's bed, I was here, working, providing, loving you. And you decided that wasn't enough." Tears welled in her eyes. "I made a mistake." I laughed, cold and sharp. "No, Claire. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is misplacing your car keys. What you did, that was a choice." She shook her head, gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Nick, please. I don't want to lose you." "You already have." The words were final, absolute. She stared at me, realization dawning. Her life was about to change forever, and it was all her own doing. Claire begged. She pleaded. But I was done listening. "You have until the end of the week to get out," I told her, my voice void of emotion. She sobbed. "Where am I supposed to go?" I shrugged. "That's not my problem." And then I leaned in, lowering my voice to a whisper. "But here's something for you to think about, Claire. While you were off playing house with Craig, I was making moves too." She blinked at me, confused. I smiled. "You see, Claire, Craig has a wife. A beautiful wife named Haley. And as of this morning, she knows everything." The blood drained from her face. I continued. Craig's life is falling apart as we speak. His wife? She's taking the kids, the house, and half of everything he owns. And Craig? I chuckled. He's about to lose his job, thanks to a well-placed tip about his extracurricular activities. Claire covered her mouth, horror flashing in her eyes. I leaned back, satisfied. Actions have consequences, darling. And yours? Well, let's just say you're about to feel them in full force. She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. But I felt nothing. No remorse. No sympathy. Because in that moment, I knew I had one. Claire sat there, trembling, her entire world crumbling around her. The realization of what I had done, how I had flipped the game on her, was settling in. I watched her with the cold detachment of a man who no longer saw the woman in front of him as his wife, but as a traitor facing her reckoning. "You told his wife," she stammered. I smirked, leaning back in my chair. "Not just told her, Claire. I sent her every single picture, every reservation detail, every message you two exchanged. Right now, Craig is either getting thrown out or begging for mercy. Either way, he's finished." Her lip quivered. "Nick, please." I stood, cutting her off. "Pack your things, Claire. You have 3 days. If you're still here after that, I will have the locks changed and your things dumped on the curb." She gasped. "You wouldn't." I tilted my head, a slow smile curling my lips. "Try me." For years, I had been the calm, devoted husband, the man who forgave easily, overlooked the little things, and did everything in my power to make our family's life better. That man was dead, and Claire was finally meeting the version of me she had created. The next 48 hours were pure chaos. I heard Claire crying in the bedroom at night, frantically making phone calls, likely to Craig. But as I predicted, Craig had his own problems. His wife, Haley, had wasted no time filing for divorce, and she had hired a shark of a lawyer to take him for everything. By Tuesday morning, Claire was a wreck. She sat at the kitchen table, barely touching her coffee, her hands shaking. "Nick, I need to talk to you." I continued flipping through the morning paper, not bothering to look at her. "About what?" She hesitated. "About us." I let out a humorless chuckle, finally setting the paper down. "There is no us, Claire." Tears welled in her eyes. "Nick, I was stupid. I got caught up in something I thought was missing, but the truth is, I was never missing anything. I was just blind to what I already had." I let her words hang in the air for a moment before leaning forward, my gaze piercing. "And what exactly do you expect me to do with that, Claire? Forget everything? Welcome you back with open arms?" She swallowed. "I just want a chance to fix things." I studied her for a long moment before smirking. "You had a chance, 25 years of them, and you threw them all away for a weekend with a pathetic excuse of a man." Her bottom lip trembled. "So that's it?" I leaned back, arms crossed. "That's it, Claire." She finally understood. She had lost me, and no amount of tears would change that. The news of Claire's affair spread faster than wildfire. Ava and Katie found out first. The moment they learned how much they had been used in their mother's deception, they were furious. "Dad, I swear, I never thought it would go this far," Katie sobbed, guilt evident in her eyes. "I wasn't interested in their apologies. Your mother used you. She manipulated you into helping her betray me. That's something you'll have to live with." The weight of my words hit them hard. Ben, my son, was the last to find out, and his reaction was pure rage. "She did what?" he roared when I told him. When he stormed into the house and confronted Claire, I didn't stop him. I sat back and watched as he unleashed years of anger. "You had a perfect marriage, a perfect family," Ben yelled, "and you threw it all away for some loser." Claire sobbed, trying to reach for him, but he jerked away. "Don't touch me." I could see it in his eyes, the same realization I had reached. She wasn't the woman we had once loved. She was just a stranger wearing her face. By the time the week was up, Claire had packed her bags. She stood by the door, looking small, fragile, nothing like the confident, carefree woman who had walked out on Friday. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. I met her gaze, completely devoid of emotion. "But you did." She took a shuddering breath. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I tilted my head, considering her words. Then I gave her the cruelest truth of all. I don't feel anything for you anymore, Claire. No anger, no sadness, no regret. The only thing I feel is peace. For the first time in years, I was free. Free from her lies, free from the weight of her betrayal, free to build a new life for myself. And that's exactly what I did. Over the next few months, I focused on myself. I traveled. I reconnected with old friends. I worked out. I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned in the pursuit of being the perfect husband. And slowly, I healed. Claire, on the other hand, spiraled. With Craig's life in ruins, he wanted nothing to do with her. She bounced between temporary apartments, trying to find stability, but everywhere she went, she was met with judgment, whispers behind her back. She had become the woman who destroyed her own life. And I had become the man who rose from the ashes. Months later, I ran into Claire at a cafe. She looked different, weaker, like a shadow of the woman she once was. "Nick," she breathed, standing awkwardly. I glanced at her, my gaze unreadable. "Claire." She fidgeted. I've been thinking about us." I took a sip of my coffee, completely unaffected. "There is no us." She swallowed hard. I miss you." I chuckled, shaking my head. "No, Claire. You miss the life you had. The life I gave you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Is there really no chance? No way we can fix things?" I studied her for a moment before setting my cup down. Then, with the coldest, most detached voice I had ever used, I sealed her fate. "You don't exist to me anymore." Her breath hitched, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I stood up, throwing a few bills on the table before turning away. And just like that, I walked out of her life forever. As I walked away from Claire that day, I felt something shift inside me, something permanent. I had finally closed the chapter that had tormented me for months. And in doing so, I realized something fundamental. I wasn't broken anymore. For the first time in years, I was truly free. I threw myself into life with a renewed sense of purpose. I traveled to places I had only ever dreamed of: Greece, Japan, Australia. I climbed mountains, swam in crystal-clear waters, and met people who made me remember what it felt like to be alive. But the most important journey? The one inside my own mind. I worked on myself, mentally, physically, emotionally. I hit the gym, sculpting my body into something stronger, fitter. I started reading more, investing, expanding my knowledge and wealth. And slowly, I built something incredible, a life without Claire. A life where I didn't just survive, I thrived. While I was rising, Claire was falling. She tried reaching out to our children, but Ben wanted nothing to do with her. Katie and Ava, while still somewhat sympathetic, could not look at her without guilt in their eyes. Worse still, Craig had abandoned her completely. His wife had stripped him of everything: his home, his savings, his reputation. In the end, he had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. And Claire? She had bet her entire life on a man who never intended to keep her. With nowhere to go, she ended up in a small, cramped apartment. She found work at a receptionist desk, nothing glamorous, but enough to keep the lights on. She had once been the queen of her home. Now, she was just another lonely woman, regretting every single choice that had led her there. It was a year after Claire's betrayal when I met her, Sophia. She was everything Claire wasn't: passionate, driven, kind. We met at a charity event of all places, where she was volunteering. There was something about the way she carried herself, a confidence and warmth that drew me in. Unlike Claire, she didn't take me for granted. She saw me, respected me, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel something real again. When Claire saw me with Sophia, it shattered her. She had come to drop off some old family photos for the kids when she saw us together at a restaurant. The moment our eyes met across the room, I saw it, the gut-wrenching regret in her expression. She had assumed I would be alone. She had assumed I would never move on. She was wrong. She walked over hesitantly. "Nick." I barely glanced at her, my arm around Sophia. "Claire." Her voice was small, broken. You're seeing someone?" I smirked, taking Sophia's hand. See? No, Claire. I'm living. She swallowed hard, looking like she was on the verge of tears. I miss you. Sophia shifted beside me, sensing the tension. I turned fully to Claire, my gaze unreadable. You don't get to miss me, Claire. You made your choice. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. You were supposed to be mine, she whispered. I tilted my head. And yet, you gave me away. Her face crumpled. And just like that, I turned my back on her forever. That moment sealed everything for me. Revenge wasn't about destroying Claire's life. It wasn't about making her suffer. It was about rising above her. And I had. Claire would spend the rest of her days drowning in regret. She would replay every mistake, every betrayal, every cruel decision she had made until it consumed her. And me? I had a new love, a new future, and a new life that had nothing to do with her. That was the ultimate revenge. Not destruction, but thriving. And so, as I walked out of that restaurant, hand in hand with Sophia, I knew I had truly won. Months passed, and the distance between Claire and our children grew wider. Ben refused to see her at all, and Ava and Katie spoke to her out of obligation, not love. Dad, Katie admitted one evening, I think we enabled her. I took a sip of my drink, nodding. You did. Ava wiped at her eyes. Do you think she'll ever change? I sighed, shaking my head. No. She lost everything because she thought she was entitled to more than she had. People like that don't change. They both fell silent, taking in the truth of my words. Years later, I ran into Claire one last time. She looked older, worn down. The vibrancy she once had was gone. Nick, she whispered, almost afraid to speak. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized something shocking. I felt nothing. No anger. No pain. Just nothing. She had become nothing more than a ghost of my past. And so, with a small nod, I walked away, leaving her behind for good. Years passed, and my life continued to flourish. Sophia and I built a beautiful life together, one filled with adventure, laughter, and love. I watched my children grow, watched my business expand, watched my world become something I had once thought impossible, a future without Claire, a future where I was truly happy. And as I stood on a balcony overlooking the ocean, Sophia's arms wrapped around me, I realized something. The past no longer defined me. I was free. Claire faded into obscurity. She lived a life of mediocrity, alone, regretful, and haunted by the choices she had made. She would never recover from what she had lost. But I had moved on. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. The end.